Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Hannah if you're new here, and in today's video I'm talking about the best books I read. I am kind of breaking up this video tentatively by genre, and I am going to try to rank these in their genre. So from number 6 to number 1, what was the best book I read in that genre. Now this is incredibly hard for any bookworm to pick a favorite of the year, but I think my heart is telling me these are the absolute best of the best that I read this year. The first genre we're going to tackle is romance. Number 6 is The Wallflower Wager by Tessa Dare. This is about Lady Penelope Campion, who lives next door to kind of a vacant unit, and a man named Gabriel Duke moves in, and one day she accidentally finds herself in his home uninvited because her pet bird flew over there. So that kind of gives you the idea for the tone and the vibe of this romance. And the reason I love this so much is because Penelope essentially saves herself in the end. She's kind of in a pretty intense situation, and she is the one that gets herself out of it, and I really appreciate Penelope as a character for that. And this is also just a great romance in general. Next on this list is Real by Kennedy Ryan. Now this one really surprised me. This is about Cannon, who is the movie director, and Neva, who is the actress for this famous film that they're making. And this is about them falling in love, but a big portion of this book has to deal with Neva's lupus and her journey with that. So this is pretty serious, and this has some pretty intense themes in it as well. However, I do think the romance in here is also super solid and very sweet as well. So in my opinion, it balances those two things out really well. I also enjoyed the behind the scenes filming aspects of this book, so I just thought this was a really solid read, and that's why it's number 5. Number 4 is A Caribbean Heiress in Paris, and this is so steamy to me. The sexual tension between our two protagonists is unreal before they even get together. This is about our main character, Lutz Alana, who is from the Caribbean, and she goes to Europe to try to expand the market for her family's rum. In Europe, she meets a man named James Eviston, and he is a whiskey distiller. The two of them end up meeting at essentially a convention for distillers, and sparks fly pretty much immediately, and they end up in kind of a marriage of convenience. Not only did I love the romance in this book, I loved all of the side characters and the side relationships that were happening as well. Number 3 is A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall. This is about a trans woman named Viola and her best friend, the Duke of Gracewood, meeting up again after the war has torn them apart, and them coming back together and falling in love. I think the romance in here is top tier, and this has one of the most beautiful declarations of love scenes I've ever read, and it was just so beautiful, them telling each other how they really feel. It made me cry. I really appreciate the representation for PTSD, and Gracewood also walks with a cane, so there is some disability representation in here, as well as the trans representation by Viola. I just really appreciate this book, and I'm so glad I read it this year. Number 2 is Work For It by Talia Hibbert. This is a Achillean romance, and this is a grumpy romance where both the men are extremely grumpy, and I absolutely loved this. This is about Olu, who is kind of dealing with a lot of emotional issues, and so he decides to get away from it all and kind of go work on a farm for the summer. And on that farm is our other male lead, Griffin, who is kind of the head of the farm operations, and he also invents his own cordial recipes. And the two of them kind of had a weird first encounter, and then as they slowly work together on the farm, they develop feelings for each other. This was beautiful, this was touching, this was emotional and impactful, and that's why it's number 2. This is one of my favorite Talia Hibbert works ever, and I really recommend this one. And my favorite romance of the year is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. This is a sapphic rom-com about Delilah Green, who has to travel back to her small town, which she hates, to do the photography for her sister's Astrid's wedding. And Delilah starts to kind of have some feelings and some vibes with one of the bridesmaids. What I love about this romance is not only are we focusing on the romance aspect between the two lead female characters, is each of the leads have their own personal journeys to go on. Delilah is dealing with like familial relationships and kind of reforging the bond she has with her stepsister. And then we also have Claire, who is a single mom and is dealing with being a mom and her tenuous relationship with her ex and, you know, raising a kid. And then on top of all of that, there is a plot to kind of break up Astrid and her fiance because her fiance is a jerk. So we have a lot of antics going on in this romance. And I ate it up. I thought it was a good time. I thought it was fun and funny, sweet and tender and steamy. This is why it's my favorite romance of the year. Next, we have a couple of books that I want to just briefly mention, and they're kind of in their own separate genres. So let's get started. I read 2 horror books that are making it onto my favorites list, and yes, they're both by Sarah Gailey, Just Like Home and the Eat the Rich comic book series. And I absolutely adore these horror novels. I think they were so fun and just a really intense to read and made me feel a lot of feelings. I have an entire video about Sarah Gailey as an author and why I love them so much, as well as a review up for Eat the Rich as a standalone review if you would like additional thoughts and feelings on these. And the last miscellaneous book I want to talk about is a manga series, and I just had to put A Man and His Cat as a series on my favorites of the year. This manga series was such a joy to read. It's just about this man whose wife has passed away, and his wife always wanted to get a cat, and it never really happened. And so now that she has passed on, he decides to get a cat in kind of honor of her memory, and it's about this man bonding with this cat, and you get the cat's perspective as well. And it is just truly delightful. I highly recommend this series. It is so sweet and charming and fun, and it's really about this man kind of coming out of his shell and reaching out to individuals and opening himself up to friendships and, you know, meaningful relationships after a huge loss. So highly recommend. The last genre section we're going to get into is the fantasy and science fiction genre. Number 6 in the fantasy genre has to go to Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I have a full review up for this on my channel. This was an instant favorite, an instant comfort read. I've read it twice this year. This is just a really slow-paced slice of life fantasy novel, and this is one of the first like cozy mysteries I've read in a really long time, and it just brought me so much joy and happiness. This is about Viv, who is an orc barbarian, and she just wants to open a coffee shop in a fantasy world, and the friendships in here are incredible. It's so sweet and charming and fun, and it just makes me want to drink a cup of coffee and have a delicious pastry. Number 5 has to go to Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. This is a retelling of a traditionally villainous character named Kaikeyi from the Ramayana, and this is about her growing up and getting married and having children and her whole life essentially experience, and this is incredible. This is really high on the political aspects, but this also has a lot of heart because Kaikeyi has a lot of familial connections that she establishes and grows throughout her entire journey. And I think that is probably that balance of the heavy politics with the family and the love and the connections there is really what made this a favorite for me. My number 4 slot goes to the Trader Baru Cormorant series, which is technically the Masquerade series. Books 1, 2, and 3. This took my breath away with how intense and political this is. This is about Baru Cormorant, who grows up on an island nation that is essentially colonized by the Masquerade Empire. She has two fathers and a mother, and the Masquerade Empire kills one of her fathers and is incredibly homophobic, transphobic, and they practice eugenics. So Beru decides to play the long game and break the empire from within. So she goes to an empire-based school to learn how to best them from the inside. And this series is wild and violent and political, and Beru is so smart and savvy and driven. This is intense and gory, so be warned going into this if you're interested, but this is one of the best series I have ever read. My number 3 spot, it is not Foundry's Side, but it is the third and final installment in the Founders trilogy, and that is Lachlan's by Robert Jackson Bennett. In this world, you can basically essentially rewrite the code of an object to convince it to do something else. We open with Sansia, who is a thief, and she ends up stealing something and keeping it for herself instead of handing it over to the people who hired her to steal it. And things just go wild from there. This is, again, such a wonderful conclusion to the trilogy. I sobbed my eyes out, and again, I vlogged that experience. If you want to see me sob over the ending of this book, I have a video for you. Number 2 is the entirety of the Dandelion Dynasty saga, which is 4 books by Ken Liu. I have not shut up about this series because it is so wonderful and epic. This is about, the first book, I should say, is about these two kind of warring factions who are both trying to overthrow an emperor. And they have differing ideologies on how they should run the country after the emperor is deposed. So they start out as allies and friends, and the two of them end up becoming enemies and fighting each other. This is one of the best fantasy series I have ever read of all time. I think it's fabulous, it's complex, there's a ton of characters, which might be overwhelming at first, but you grow to love certain characters, and there's a character for everyone. There's a lot of gray morality happening. This is just incredible, and it will pull on your heartstrings. It definitely pulled on mine and firmly lodged itself as a favorite book, a favorite series of all time, as well as this year. My number 1 favorite fantasy series of the year has to go to the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. So this is about a fantasy world where we're following 2 rival crime families who control Jade, and Jade produces magical powers, essentially. That's a really, really quick version, but this follows essentially one of those crime families and their members as they are battling with the other crime family. And this is so character driven and fun and epic. And the reason I have to put it at my number 1 spot above the Dandelion Dynasty is because, for very personal reasons, and that's because I got my sister to read this series as well. So not only did I just love reading this trilogy on its own, but I got to bond with my sister over her love for this series as well. And that just makes this trilogy incredibly special to me. So that's why Jade City and the entire Greenbone Saga is my number 1 favorite fantasy series I read this year. It's hard to talk coherently about my favorites because all I want to do is gush about them for 10 minutes each, but I hope you enjoyed this video and you got some great recommendations based on what I thought was great this year. What was your favorite book this year? I know that's a really hard question to answer, but maybe give me your top 3 or 5 or something in the comments down below, as I would love to know. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye.